The neon sign of the rusty anchor flickered in a dying rhythm, casting a jagged electric blue light over the man who held the future of the global economy in his trembling hands. Aloyo Toscano, the Iron Dawn of Wall Street, a man who ate conglomerates for breakfast, was staring at a fountain pen as if it were a loaded gun. Across from him, three suit-clad predators from Vanguard Holdings leaned in, their smiles as sharp as the poison pill clause hidden on page 342 of the merger contract. "Sign it, Aloyo," they whispered. "Save your legacy." He leaned forward, the ink hovering over the line that would end his empire. But then, a cold, steady hand landed on the scarred mahogany of the bar. Martina Lori, a woman who had spent 3 years blending into the shadows of the docks, didn't look at the billionaires. She looked at the fine print. "If you sign that," she whispered, her voice a ghost of a life she thought she'd buried, "you aren't saving your company. You're signing its death warrant. Paragraph 4, subsection C, it's not a merger. It's an execution." In that moment, the most powerful man in New York realized that his savior wasn't a lawyer or a bodyguard. It was the exhausted waitress with the smartest eyes he had ever seen. The silence of the Jersey docks at 2 a.m. isn't peaceful. It's heavy. It's the kind of silence that smells like salt, rust, and the quiet desperation of people trying to be forgotten. Martina Lori lived in that silence. She moved through the dim light of the dive bar with a practiced, rhythmic grace, her movements calculated to be unremarkable. To the regulars, the retired dock workers, and the late-night drifters, she was just Martina. A girl with tired eyes, a sharp tongue, and a way of pouring whiskey that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. But beneath the stained apron and the faded jeans lived a mind that functioned like a supercomputer. As she wiped down the bar, Martina wasn't just cleaning. She was performing a constant, subconscious threat assessment. She knew the cadence of the footsteps outside. She knew which floorboards groaned under the weight of a man carrying a concealed weapon. She knew the exact moment the atmosphere in the room shifted from end-of-the-night haze to high-stakes ambush. She had learned these things from her father, Vincenzo Lori. He hadn't taught her how to bake cookies or ride a bike. He had taught her how to dismantle a corporate hostile takeover before she was 12. He had taught her game theory, the psychology of the bluff, and the art of seeing the invisible strings that moved the world's wealth. Then, the corporate raiders had come for him. They hadn't used guns. They had used litigation, backroom deals, and a smear campaign that stripped him of his dignity before his heart finally gave out. Martina had watched him wither, and in the ashes of his ruin, she had made a choice. She would never let them see her coming. She became a ghost. The door of the bar groaned open. The cold Atlantic wind followed 4 men inside. 3 of them were sharks, men in $5,000 charcoal suits, their faces tight with a predatory impatience. The 4th man was Aloyo Toscano. No doubt Martina recognized him instantly, not from the tabloids but from the data she still tracked in her head. Aloyo was the genius behind Toscano Tech, the Iron Dawn who had revolutionized algorithmic trading. He looked exhausted. His tie was loosened, his hair disheveled, and his eyes carried the haunted look of a man who had been fighting a war on too many fronts. The sharks guided him to the corner booth. They didn't order drinks. They laid out a leather-bound folder. "The board is already in favor, Aloyo," the lead shark, a man named Sterling, said. His voice was oily, filled with a manufactured empathy. "This merger with Vanguard is the only way to stop the bleeding. You're losing the infrastructure. Your stock is plummeting. Sign this and we take the heat. You stay on as a consultant. You keep your pride." Martina stood at the end of the bar, a rag in her hand. She wasn't supposed to listen. She was supposed to be invisible. But she saw the way Sterling's thumb twitched when he pointed to the signature line. She saw the way the other 2 men exchanged a glance that lasted exactly half a second too long. It was a standard pincer move. A classic corporate trap. Aloyo picked up the pen. His hand was shaking. "I built this from nothing," he rasped. "My father's name is on that building. And it will stay there," Sterling lied. Martina felt a surge of something she hadn't felt in years, righteous fury. She saw her father in Aloyo's hesitation. She saw the predators who had destroyed her life sitting right there in her section. She walked over, her footsteps silent. She didn't ask if they wanted refills. She reached out and placed a hand on the folder, sliding it toward her just an inch. "You have a lot of nerve bringing garbage like this into a respectable bar," she said. Her voice flat and cold. Sterling looked up, his face contorting into a mask of aristocratic annoyance. "Excuse me, sweetheart. We're in the middle of a private meeting. Go get us some water." Martina didn't move. She didn't even look at Sterling. She looked directly into Aloyo's bloodshot eyes. "Mr. Toscano, don't sign that. If you do, Vanguard triggers a change of control." Clause hidden in the definitions of affiliated entities on page 342. They aren't merging with you. They're using a poison pill to devalue your voting shares to zero the moment the ink dries. They'll liquidate your R&D department by Monday morning and sell the patents to your biggest competitor in Shanghai. The silence that followed was absolute. The three sharks froze, their faces turning a ghostly shade of pale. Aloyo frowned, his brain struggling to switch gears from despair to analysis. How could you possibly know that?" Martina flipped the document to the back, her fingers moving with lightning speed. "Because I've seen this exact syntax before. This was drafted by Marcus Thorne's legal team. He uses a specific logic trap in his indemnification subclauses. It looks like a safety net, but it's a noose." She looked at Sterling. "And you? You're not a partner at Vanguard. You're a short seller. You've bet millions on his failure." Sterling stood up, his chair screeching against the floor. "This is absurd. You're a waitress. You're a nobody." "I might be a nobody," Martina whispered, leaning in until she was inches from his face, her eyes flashing with a terrifying intelligence. "But I can read a balance sheet better than you can read a room. Now get out of my bar before I call the SEC and tell them exactly which insider trading violations I just witnessed." The sharks didn't argue. They didn't bluster. They gathered their papers with trembling hands and fled into the night, the door slamming behind them. Aloyo Toscano sat alone in the booth, staring at the empty space where his ruin had almost been finalized. He looked up at Martina, who was already back at the bar, picking up her rag as if nothing had happened. He stood up and walked to the bar, his movements slow as if he were waking from a dream. He didn't look at her like a waitress. He looked at her like a miracle. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Martina didn't look up from the mahogany. "I'm the person who just saved your life, Mr. Toscano. Now, do you want a drink? Or are you going to stand there and catch flies?" Aloyo reached into his pocket and pulled out a card. It wasn't a business card. It was a private, encrypted contact. He slid it across the bar. "I don't just want a drink," he said, his voice regaining the iron that had made him famous. "I don't just want a dramus. I want to know why a master-level risk analyst is pouring cheap whiskey in a place like this. And more importantly, I want to hire you. I'm being hunted, Martina. And I think you're the only person in this city who sees the hunters." Martina looked at the card, then at the man. For the first time in 3 years, the ghost felt a heartbeat. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments with those who believe that destiny can change everything one day. Subscribe, because when destiny shifts, everything changes. The glass walls of the Toscano Tower didn't just overlook Manhattan. They seemed to hold the city captive. Inside, the air was filtered, chilled, and smelled of expensive espresso and silent panic. Aloyo stood by the window, his silhouette sharp against the sunrise, but his reflection in the glass showed a man fraying at the edges. "They're coming for me, Martina," he said, not turning around. "Not with a hostile takeover anymore. This is deeper. Internal sabotage. My own board of directors is leaking proprietary code to a shadow firm in Zurich. I'm being bled dry from the inside, and I can't find the knife." Martina walked to the center of the room, her heavy boots silent on the silk rug. She didn't look at the view. She looked at the desks, the monitors, and the subtle shift in the assistant's eyes as she passed. "You can't find the knife because you're looking for a weapon," she said, her voice echoing in the minimalist space. "In this world, the knife is a handshake. The knife is a delayed email. The knife is a glitch in the server that everyone calls an accident." She dropped a leather satchel on his obsidian desk. Inside weren't weapons, but psychological profiles she had spent the last 48 hours compiling. You've spent your life hiring the best programmers and the most aggressive lawyers. But you forgot one thing. Humans are the weakest link in any security chain. Aloyo turned, his brow furrowed. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we strip away the polish, Martina replied, stepping closer until she was in his personal space. You fight like a gentleman, Aloyo. You wait for the bell to ring. But your enemies? They've been hitting you while your back was turned. Lesson 1. Stop looking at the numbers. Start looking at the micro-expressions. When Carmen, your coup, mentions the Zurich leak, does his left eye twitch? When your lead developer says the firewall is impenetrable, does he touch his neck? That's where the truth lives. For the next 3 weeks, the Toscano Tower became a training ground. But there were no gym mats or boxing gloves. Instead, Martina forced Aloyo into simulated boardroom interrogations. She taught him how to read the digital fingerprint of a liar. She showed him how to spot a Trojan horse embedded in a legal brief, not by reading the code, but by understanding the intent of the person who wrote it. Lower your guard, she'd snap during their late-night sessions. You're projecting billionaire confidence. It's a shield, but it's also a blindfold. If you want to catch a rat, you have to smell like the cellar. As they worked, the professional distance began to dissolve, replaced by a raw intellectual intimacy. One evening, over cold takeout and stacks of forensic audits, the mask slipped. Why did you stay hidden for so long? Aloyo asked softly, watching her circle a discrepancy in a ledger with a red pen. A mind like yours. You could have owned this city. Martina paused, the pen hovering over the paper. The memory of the fire, the smell of burning oak, and her father's desperate scream flashed behind her eyes. Because when you own the city wants to own you, she whispered. My father thought he was a partner to these people. He thought a contract was a bond of honor. He died realizing he was just a line item they decided to delete. She looked up, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I didn't want to be a line item, Aloyo. Aloyo reached out, his hand hovering over hers. He didn't pull away when she stiffened. You're not a line item to me, Martina. You're the only person who sees me. Not the Iron Dawn, just me. The moment was shattered by the chime of a secure notification. The charity gala was in 48 hours. The entire Shark Tank of Wall Street would be there, including the men who had tried to ruin him at the bar. The gala is a trap, Martina said, her voice returning to its tactical chill. They expect you to show up defensive. They expect you to be looking for a fight. And what are we going to do? Aloyo asked. Martina leaned back, a predatory smile touching her lips, the same smile her father had worn before his final tragic stand. We're going to give them a performance. You're going to be the arrogant, distracted billionaire they think you are. And I'm going to be the distraction that records every whisper in the room. She stood up, walking toward the door, but paused at the threshold. But first, we need to get you a new suit, Aloyo. One that doesn't say, I'm powerful. One that says, I've already won. And you're too stupid to know it. As she left, Aloyo stayed in the darkness of his office, the weight of his empire feeling lighter than it had in years. He realized he wasn't just hiring a risk analyst. He was falling in love with a woman who had turned her trauma into a masterclass in survival. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like the video. The charity gala at the Pier Hotel was a sea of silk, diamonds, and high-functioning sociopaths. To the world, Aloyo Toscano was the guest of honor. To the men circling him, he was a wounded whale in blood-filled waters. Martina stood at his side, her midnight blue gown flowing like liquid ink, concealing the specialized recording hardware strapped to her thigh. She wasn't just his date. She was his sonar. Smile, Aloyo, she whispered, her lips barely moving as they glided past a group of hedge fund managers. Carmen is watching from the balcony. He's looking for the sweat on your brow. Give him the arrogant smirk of a man who thinks he's untouchable. Aloyo squeezed her hand, a gesture that looked romantic to the cameras, but was a tactical signal of acknowledgement. He thinks the Zurich leak is working, Aloyo murmured back. He thinks he's already won. Let him think it, Martina said. Confidence is the loudest noise a traitor makes. It's the sound that drowns out their own footsteps. Underscore the full script. Part 3. The gala was a theater of the absurd. Martina watched as Carmen Russo, Aloyo's coup and a man who had served the Toscano family for a decade, held court near the champagne fountain. Carmen was the picture of loyalty, but Martina saw the micro-shift, the way his posture straightened, and his pupils dilated whenever Aloyo's back was turned. He wasn't just a traitor. He was an architect of ruin. The evening was a blur of calculated small talk and hidden daggers. But the real war started at 3 a.m. the following morning. Martina was in the secure safe house, her eyes stinging from the blue light of 4 monitors. When her private burner phone buzzed, it was a video file. No text. She opened it, and the breath left her lungs. It was her sister, Sophia. She was sitting in a dimly lit room, her hands bound with zip ties, her face pale with a terror that Martina felt in her own marrow. "Hello, hello?" "Martina," Carmen's voice came from off-camera, smooth and terrifyingly calm. Or should I say the ghost of Vincenzo Lori. "You thought you could hide in a dive bar, forever. But ghosts always leave a trail of cold air." Martina didn't scream. She didn't cry. Her father's training took over the ICE protocol. She slowed her breathing, her mind instantly categorizing the background of the video. The acoustic tiles. The industrial hum of a server cooling system. A basement. Not a warehouse. A data center. "What do you want, Carmen?" She whispered to the empty room. The phone rang. She answered on the first vibration. "Tomorrow morning at the opening bell," Carmen said. "You are going to use Aloyo's master biometric key to initiate a ghost transfer. You're going to wipe his primary liquidity accounts and move the funds to an offshore escrow in the Caymans. If the money isn't there by 9:31 a.m., your sister becomes a memory. Just like your father." The line went dead. Martina sat in the darkness for exactly 60 seconds. She felt the crushing weight of the trauma, the fire, the loss, the years of running. Carmen was using her greatest weakness, the people she loved. He expected her to crumble. He expected her to choose her sister and destroy the man she was starting to love. But Carmen didn't know Martina. He knew the girl who ran. He didn't know the woman who had been trained to turn a trap into a cage. She called Aloyo. He arrived at the safe house 20 minutes later, his face grim. When she showed him the video, he didn't flinch. He didn't look at her with suspicion. He looked at her with a fierce, protective focus. "I'll give him the money," Aloyo said instantly. "We'll track the transfer. We'll find her." "No," Martina said, her voice hard as diamond. "If we send the money, he wins. He'll kill her anyway to tie up the loose ends. Carmen doesn't want the money. He wants the power that comes with destroying you. We aren't going to give him a transfer. We're going to give him a mirror script." She spent the next 6 hours coding, a skill her father had insisted she master alongside tactical combat. A mirror script was a digital illusion. It would show Carmen a successful transfer on his end, reflecting the exact numbers he expected to see. But in reality, the funds would never leave Aloyo's secure vault. Instead, the script would trace the handshake back to Carmen's hidden server, bypassing his firewalls and downloading every encrypted file he had ever touched. "It's a digital Trojan horse," Martina explained, her fingers flying across the keys. "He thinks he's robbing you. In reality, he's giving us the keys to his entire criminal history. His embezzlements, his bribes, his communication with the Zurich firm, everything." "And Sophia?" Aloyo asked, his hand resting on her shoulder. "I've already geolocated the hum from the video," Martina said. "It's a decommissioned Toscano data center in Queens. He's holding her in the one place he thinks you won't look. But he's wrong." At 9 a.m., the world watched the markets open. Inside the Toscano Tower, Martina and Aloyo stood before the master terminal. Carmen was on a video link, his face a mask of smug triumph. "Do it, Martina," Carmen sneered. "Save the girl. End the Iron Dawn." Martina looked at Aloyo. She saw the trust in his eyes, a trust she had never dared to give anyone. She pressed enter. On Carmen's screen, a progress bar began to fill. 10%, 50, 100. "Transfer complete," the terminal chirped. Carmen laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "You're a coward, Martina. Just like your father. You chose survival over loyalty." "Actually," Martina said, her voice dropping an octave, "I chose justice." She hit a second key. Carmen's screen turned red. A massive system breach warning flashed across his face. What did you do? He screamed. I just sent your entire life's work to the SEC, the FBI, and the Zurich police, Martina said. And while you were watching that progress bar, Aloyo's private security team just breached the Queen's data center. Sophia is safe, Carmen, but you? You're finished. The video feed cut out as the sound of sirens echoed in the background of Carmen's office. Aloyo exhaled, the tension leaving his body in a shuddering wave. He turned to Martina, pulling her into a desperate, grounding hug. For the first time in 3 years, the ghost didn't feel like she was haunting a life. She felt like she was finally living one, but the war wasn't over. Marco, the architect of the final, desperate strike, was still in the shadows. And he wasn't going to use a keyboard. He was going to use a virus that no firewall could stop. The victory over Carmen had been swift. But in the world of high finance, a wounded predator is often more dangerous than a hungry one. Marco, the shadowy architect behind the Zurich firm, wasn't just losing money. He was losing his invisibility. As the FBI began seizing servers across Manhattan, Marco retreated to the only place the law couldn't easily reach, international waters. Aboard the Fortuna, Aloyo's flagship yacht, the air was supposed to be filled with celebration. But Martina couldn't shake the chill in her spine. She didn't see a party. She saw a floating target. The Atlantic was a sheet of black glass beneath a moonless sky. On the deck of the Fortuna, the elite of New York's tech scene toasted to Aloyo's survival. Laughter echoed off the waves, but Martina stood by the railing, her eyes scanning the dark horizon. She wasn't wearing a gown tonight. She was back in her tactical gear, a silent shadow among the glittering guests. You should be celebrating, Martina, Aloyo said, stepping beside her. He looked younger, the weight of Carmen's betrayal finally lifted from his shoulders. Sophia is safe at the estate. The board has been purged. We won. We won the battle, Aloyo, Martina whispered, her gaze never wavering from the sea. But Marco is a scorched earth player. He doesn't retreat. He deletes. At exactly 11:42 p.m., the music died. Not because the DJ stopped, but because the power grid of the Fortuna vanished. The elegant chandeliers flickered and died, plunging the guests into a terrifying starless dark. Don't panic, Aloyo shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the sudden, violent roar of the emergency sirens. Martina's tablet flared to life in her hand, scrolling through red lines of malicious code. It's a 0-day worm, she hissed, her fingers flying across the screen. Marco didn't send gunmen. He sent a digital virus through the yacht's satellite uplink. It's overriding the engine cooling systems and the navigation. He's going to overheat the generators and lock the stabilizers. He's trying to sink us in the middle of the ocean. Can you stop it? Aloyo asked, his hand finding hers in the dark. Not from here. I have to go to the server room in the hull. It's the only way to hard reset the system before the core melts down. She moved through the panicked crowd like a phantom, descending into the bowels of the ship where the heat was already rising. The air in the engine room was thick with the smell of ozone and hot metal. At the center of the room sat the master server rack, its lights blinking a frantic, rhythmic crimson. Martina plugged her laptop directly into the mainframe. The virus was sophisticated, a beautiful, lethal piece of logic that mirrored her father's own theories on systemic collapse. It was like fighting a ghost of her own past. Come on, she whispered, her sweat dripping onto the keyboard. Talk to me. For 10 agonizing minutes, she danced with the virus, pairing its subroutines and isolating its core. Every time she closed a back door, 2 more opened. The floor began to tilt as the stabilizers failed. Martina, the heat is critical. Aloyo's voice crackled over her gums. You have to get out of there. Not yet, she screamed back. She saw it then, the kill switch hidden in a string of recursive loops. It wasn't a digital lock. It was a psychological one. Marco had used a date as the encryption key. The date her father's company fell. She typed the numbers. 10-14-22-1. The crimson lights turned a steady, calm green. The hum of the engines smoothed out. The light's top deck flickered back to life. The silence that followed was broken only by Martina's ragged breathing. She slumped against the cool metal of the server rack, her eyes closing. The war was finally truly over. 1 month later, the docks of Jersey felt different. The rusty anchor was still there, but the neon sign no longer flickered. It burned bright and steady. Martina stood on the pier, watching the sunset with Sophia, who was laughing for the first time in weeks. Aloyo approached them, not as the Iron Dawn, but as a man who had found his harbor. He handed Martina a folder. It wasn't a contract or a security brief. The Lori Toscano Foundation, he said softly. We've already seeded it with 50 million. Its mission is to provide legal and digital protection for startups being targeted by predatory raiders. No more line items, Martina. We're going to be the shield your father never had. Martina looked at the name on the folder. Her father's legacy was no longer a story of ruin. It was a story of protection. Aloyo took her hand, pulling her close as the city lights began to twinkle across the water. I spent my life building walls, he whispered. I didn't realize I was just waiting for someone smart enough to show me how to tear them down. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. It wasn't a corporate merger. It was a proposal of a different kind. I don't want a consultant, Martina. I want a partner, forever. Martina looked at the ring, then at the man who had seen the genius behind the waitress. She didn't need to perform a threat assessment. She didn't need to look for an exit. For the first time in her life, she was exactly where she was meant to be. Yes, she whispered, her voice carried away by the salt breeze. No more hiding. The ghost was gone. In her place stood a queen, finally ruling the empire she was born to protect. What an absolutely incredible journey we've just experienced together. From the salt-stained counters of a dive bar to the heights of global power. Martina Lori proved that true strength isn't about the weapons you carry, but the mind you sharpen. If you love this corporate romance drama, please hit that like button and subscribe. To Destiny Shift, we believe in stories where intelligence is the ultimate superpower and where love is the only contract that truly matters. Turn on notifications so you never miss our next high-stakes adventure. And I have to ask, was the digital ghost transfer your favorite move, or was it the final showdown on the yacht? Comment below and let's discuss. Your support helps us keep telling these stories of redemption and brilliance. Thank you for watching, and remember, never underestimate the person standing in the shadows. They might just be the one holding the keys to the kingdom. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments with those who believe that destiny can change everything one day. Subscribe, because when destiny shifts, everything changes.